In the summer of 2003, the body of 36-year-old Saprina Payne was found in a field near Tront, Illinois. Saprina was a black female who was known to support a drug habit with prostitution. Saprina had last been seen at her home 2 days before her body was found. The original autopsy failed to determine a cause of death, leaving some of the detectives to believe she had overdosed. One detective, however, felt uneasy about that assumption. His suspicions were confirmed as more bodies were found in Peoria and Tazewell counties over the next year. On February 5, 2004, the body of 36-year-old Barbara Williams was found in a ditch near Edwards, Illinois. She was found partially clothed and lying face down in the snow. She had been seen alive between 9 and 10 p.m. the night before. An autopsy showed that she had multiple contusions and abrasions on her body. Toxicology showed that she had fatal levels of cocaine in her blood. At this point, police were not ready to call this a murder or entertain the idea of a serial killer preying on black drug-addicted prostitutes. In October of 2004, 32-year-old Shakonda Thomas was reported missing. She had last been seen by her family in August. Shakonda was known to disappear at times, but when she didn't come back after several weeks, her family reported her missing. Shirley Ann Trapp was also reported missing in the late summer of 2004. She was seen 3 days before she was reported missing. Tamara Walls was reported missing in September of 2004 after not being seen for 3 weeks. All 3 missing women were also black females known to support a crack cocaine habit with prostitution. 36-year-old mother of 8, Laura Lawler, disappeared from her home after leaving with a man and woman. Her longtime partner searched for her but only was able to determine she had been with a man named Larry. Her boyfriend, and father to her 7 daughters and 1 son, describes Laura as the love of his life and a beautiful soul. The two had experimented with crack cocaine, and Laura seemed to struggle with addiction before her disappearance. On September 25, 2004, Linda Neal was found on King Road in Tazewell County. She was found nude along the side of the road. Linda, like the other women, was known to be part of the drug scene in Peoria. At this point, police had determined there was likely a serial killer stalking black females in the Peoria area. A task force was formed, which one detective states would have occurred much quicker if the victims had been white females. While police desperately searched for the killer, they kept a close eye on women in the community at risk. Despite their efforts, on October 15, 2004, Brenda Irving's body was found in a ditch near Farmington. Brenda was found nude, and an autopsy determined that she had been strangled and suffered blunt force trauma to her head. She also had fatal levels of cocaine in her system at the time of her death. Her children had feared for their mother's safety, as she had known many of the women who had been killed or disappeared from central Illinois. Brenda struggled with drug addiction. Despite detectives' best efforts, the case proved difficult to solve. They followed thousands of leads, but finally got the lead they were waiting for in December of 2004. 35-year-old Vicki Bomer was arrested for theft. From jail, she told authorities that she thought she could help them find the serial killer preying on her fellow sex workers. She believed that a man who had picked her up in July 2004 was responsible. Bomer explained that in July, a man named Larry Bright lured her to his mother's home where they shared alcohol and drugs. Once she was intoxicated, she said Bright attacked her, attempted to rape her, and pulled a knife on her. Somehow, Bomer was able to escape. Police were at first skeptical, as Bomer asked for a plea deal in exchange for her testimony. Why hadn't she reported this back in July? Why wait until she was under arrest? Vicki Bomer claimed she was scared of being arrested for outstanding warrants, which is why she did not come forward in July 2004. A search of her criminal history confirmed the warrants, so detectives decided to take a look at the man named Larry Bright. Larry Dean Bright was born in Peoria, Illinois, on July 8, 1966. He served a 2-year stint in prison at age 19 for burglary and carjacking. According to Larry's family, the time Larry spent in prison changed him for the worse. Larry became more angry and violent and began using drugs. Larry had an injury, which started an addiction to prescription opioids and later crack cocaine. He also developed an addiction to pornography, preferring videos with black women. Larry lived with his mother in a tiny guest house behind her home. Larry enjoyed gardening, creating a beautiful garden bed of flowers for his mother. When the police arrived at Larry's home following the tip, they noticed the beautiful flowers in the garden. Larry was placed under arrest for the unlawful restraint of the key. They questioned Larry about the murders, but he denied having any information about the murdered and missing women. Throughout the interview, Larry smoked several cigarettes. Detectives planned to take one of the cigarette butts and test it for DNA, but Larry ate them before leaving the interrogation room. Larry declined to give DNA voluntarily. Police searched Larry Bright's home on January 20th, 2005. The investigators dug up the garden, finding several small bone fragments and ashes that were later determined to be human. When the police questioned Larry again, they told him they were digging up his mother's flowers. At this point, Larry broke down and confessed to multiple murders. He even led investigators to the remains of some of his victims. Larry explained that around July 27, 2003, he picked up Saprina Payne on the south side of Peoria. He drove her to his home, which he shared with his mother. He claimed the two drank and used cocaine before having consensual sex. Larry said he did not intend to kill Saprina, but he became enraged, thinking Saprina was trying to rip him off. He strangled her to death and dumped her body near the cornfield where she was found. Larry confessed to picking up Barbara Williams in February 2004. Again, he used drugs and alcohol with his victim. He stated that he once again lost control of his anger and killed Barbara. He claimed he caught Barbara stealing from him. He dumped her body along the road, where she was found the next day. The prosecution believed that after the first two murders, Larry developed a bloodlust. At the time of his arrest, he said, "I knew them I would kill the others I would pick up. I went out hunting." Larry also confessed to killing Laura Lauer. He burned her body in his backyard burn pit, burying the remains in his mother's yard. He said he wanted to destroy the bodies to avoid getting caught. He confessed to killing Tamara Walls and burning her remains. Her jawbone was found in the backyard. He admitted to strangling, beating, and burning Shirley and Trapp. Shakanda Thomas had the same fate after being picked up by Larry Bright. He burned the woman and buried the ashes in the yard. Because of his attempts to cremate his victims, he was nicknamed the Bone Crusher. Larry said that he attempted to burn Linda Neal and Brenna Irving as well, but the attempts were unsuccessful due to the weather. He dunked both women along the side of the road. Larry was facing the death penalty following his January 2005 arrest. In an attempt to spare his mother the embarrassment of a trial and avoid the death penalty, Larry Bright pleaded guilty to 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of drug-induced homicide on May 30, 2006. Bright's murders were not considered racially motivated, but detectives believe he was just attracted to black women. He is one of the very few serial killers who chooses victims outside of his race. Larry was sentenced to 7 life sentences without the possibility of parole, to be served concurrently. He was also given an additional 30 years for the drug-induced homicide. As part of the plea deal, Larry will be required to serve 100% of his sentence with no parole consideration. Larry is currently housed at the Shawnee Correctional Center in Vienna, Illinois. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars, but that brings little peace to the families of his victims. The loved ones of Larry's victims want people to know that the women he killed were more than just drug addicts or prostitutes. They were people. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. The serial killer dentist of St. Louis, Glennon Engelman. Dr. Glennon Engelman was born on February 6, 1927, in St. Louis, Missouri. Dr. Engelman grew up on the south side of the city and felt a deep connection to his neighborhood. After serving in the military, Dr. Engelman used his GI Bill to go to Washington University and become a dentist. He opened his dental office on the south side of St. Louis, serving the community he had always loved. Dr. Engelman, who went by Glenn, was married to a woman named Edna Ruth, but they divorced in 1956. By 1958, both Glenn and Ruth had remarried. Glenn was operating his dental office and appeared to be successfully serving the St. Louis community. On December 17, 1958, citizens in Forest Park noticed a bloodied man stumbling. The man, James Stanley Bullock, soon passed from his injuries. These injuries were caused by a gunshot. No one could figure out why someone would shoot 28-year-old James Bullock. James Bullock was born on April 17, 1931, in DeSoto. He was raised in Shiloh, Illinois, by his grandparents and later his aunt after his parents passed away. According to an article from 1938, the then 7-year-old was living with his grandparents in 1938 and enjoyed attending school and fishing. James later served in the military before returning to St. Louis to work and go to college. Back in St. Louis, James met Edna Ruth, the ex-wife of Dr. Glenn Engelman. The two married, and 6 short months later, James was dead. An employee at a local sanitarium initially claimed James was there 4 days before his murder, asking to be admitted because he feared for his life. His wife and aunt said this was not true, as the three had dinner together on that night. According to his widow and aunt, James was not afraid for his life, and they knew no one who would want him dead. However, Edna Ruth benefited greatly from her husband's death. Ruth had life insurance policies totaling $64,088. While under questioning, Edna Ruth made several weird statements, including telling the police she was married before, but her husband did not know. Who was she married to? Her husband's dentist, Dr. Glenn Engelman. Edna Ruth had lied to James and his family and lied on the marriage application about being married before. Police questioned a local career criminal who was out on parole for an assault at the time of the shooting. They weren't able to tie him to the murder of James, but they did note he lived near Dr. Engelman's office. Dr. Engelman and Edna Ruth both refused to take a polygraph test and denied any involvement in the murder of James Bullock. Dr. Engelman's new wife, Ida, refused to be questioned by the police. A patient provided an alibi for Dr. Engelman. However, another witness said that they tried to find someone at the office around the time and the office was empty. Edna Ruth invested part of the funds she received after becoming a widow into doctor. Been bored being a dentist, so he often ventured into other areas of business. This included buying a trike strip along with a partner, Eric Fry. Dr. Engelman had grown to be close friends with Eric and his wife Sandy. On September 26, 1963, Eric and Dr. Engelman were at the trike strip using dynamite to explode and then fill abandoned cisterns on the property. Eric was lying on his stomach near one of the cisterns when the dynamite exploded quicker than anticipated. Eric was killed instantly and found lying in the bottom of the cistern. Coroner H.D. Steinbeck ruled the death accidental. Mr. Frey's wife had an insurance policy on her husband, which she invested part of into Dr. Engelman's practice. Dr. Engelman divorced Ida and married his third wife, Ruth, in 1967. The couple shared a son, but Ruth hated the close relationship her husband had with a young woman who worked in his office named Carmen Miranda. Dr. Engelman offered to train Carmen to be a dental assistant in his office. Edna felt uncomfortable with the flirting between the doctor and his young assistant. Dr. Engelman, however, claimed he was trying to help people in his community. He hired Carmen's brother, Nick, as well at one point. Ruth was relieved when Carmen met a married man named Peter Holm. Just a few months later, however, Carmen and Eric were walking in a rural area in Pacific, Missouri. The couple were exploring an area known to have caves and scenic paths. A shot suddenly fired, hitting Peter in the head. Peter died instantly, and a hysterically Carmen flagged down the help. Nearby, police found an X on a tree made with tape. The area was familiar to locals as a hunting area, and police believed that the shot was accidental. Police believe someone was target shooting at the axe and accidentally struck Mr. Holm. Carmen had a significant amount of life insurance on her husband, totaling $60,000. This is equivalent to around $300,000 in 2024. Dr. Engelman and Ruth divorced soon after, at which time Dr. Engelman married young Carmen, whom he had known since she was a small child. His son lived with Edna, his ex-wife. Despite being married to Carmen, Dr. Engelman and Ruth still met regularly for sex. Dr. Engelman constantly had extramarital affairs, which included previous affairs with Carmen, Ruth, and even Sandy Fry, the wife of his business associate Eric Fry, who was killed by dynamite. Another of Dr. Engelman's affairs was with a patient named Barbara Boyle. On November 3, 1977, someone pretending to be from the Farm Girl walked up to the farmhouse owned by Arthur and Vernita Goosewell in Edwardsville, Illinois. Soon after entering the home, the elderly couple were attacked and both were shot in the head. The wealthy couple left $340,000 to their son, Ronald Guswell. Guess who Ronald Guswell was married to? Barbara Boyle. On April 4, 1979, less than 2 years after the murder of his parents, Ronald Guswell was found dead inside his car outside a hotel in East St. Louis, Illinois. The man had been beaten and shot to death. He had been missing for 4 days when his body was found. Following her husband's murder, Barbara collected his inheritance in addition to several life insurance policies. The equivalent sum of money today would be nearly $1.7 million. Guess who she cut to? Dr. Glennon Engelman. Following the murder of Ronald Guswell, authorities were starting to notice the trend of connected deaths to Dr. Engelman. His patients and community, however, only saw a generous man committed to helping his community and its citizens. Dr. Engelman was not the greatest dentist, however. He often did a sloppy job of making casts for dentures and dental appliances, requiring the work to have to be redone by the dental lab several times. His business was struggling, however, and he soon found himself in debt with the dental lab owned by Sophie Barrera. Sophie Barrera owned a South St. Louis dental laboratory and had grown tired of waiting for Dr. Engelman to pay up by 1980. She filed a lawsuit against the doctor that was set to go to court just a few days after Sophie was murdered. On January 14, 1980, Sophie entered her vehicle in South St. Louis. Shortly after, the vehicle exploded. Police found remnants of a bomb under her charred vehicle. Sophie had told her son before she was in fear of being killed. She believed Dr. Glenn Engelman was dangerous. Dr. Engelman was questioned for 3 hours and then released. Police were certain he was responsible for Sophie's death, but they had to prove it. The public also wondered if the bombing was related to another bombing in the area that was carried out between two mob families fighting for control over St. Louis's labor unions. The evidence indicated, however, that this was not a mob hit. The number one suspect was the man who owed Sophie $15,000. Dr. Engelman had to be stopped, but the police weren't sure how to do it. Detectives soon began having conversations with Dr. Engelman's ex-wife and mother of his son, Ruth. Ruth told police nothing at first, but eventually started to talk. She explained that Dr. Engelman often bragged about killing people. He told her that he had a superpower: he was able to kill without remorse. He had admitted to killing Eric Fry, Peter Holm, and the Guswell family. It was his side hustle, killing for profit. Ruth agreed to help the police, but none of her testimony could be used in court because Dr. Engelman confessed to her while the two were still married. He was protected by spousal privilege. Ruth decided to wear a wire, however, and met up with Dr. Engelman to exchange their son and sometimes just to socialize. They were still having a sexual relationship despite Dr. Engelman's marriage to Carmen. She tried to get Dr. Engelman to confess to her again by asking direct questions. He didn't seem to take the bait at first, and Ruth feared he would kill her next. Ruth suggested police plant a bug in her bedroom and she would invite the dentist over for sex. Dr. Engelman was suspicious, however, and did not say anything that could lead to his arrest. Ruth then met him at a diner wearing a wire, and this time he commented on being homicidally intimate with the widow of one of his victims. He admitted to the murders in great detail, providing just what police needed for an arrest. He explained that he found murder more sexually satisfying than sex. His ex-wife was given a new life in the witness protection program. Carmen, who was no longer married to the dentist, and her brother Nick were brought in for questioning to corroborate the allegations against Dr. Engelman. As possible co-conspirators, they asked for and were granted immunity to testify against the dentist. Carmen told quite the story. She said she was working for the dentist when he suggested she find someone with good benefits to marry. He told her about Eric Fry, whom he said he directed Sandy Fry to marry with all intentions of murdering the insurance proceeds. Soon after she was married, Carmen said Dr. Engelman told her where to go and made sure her husband was shot and killed. He staged it to look like a target shooting accident. Glennon Engelman was finally arrested and charged with murder in 1980. Carmen testified at Dr. Engelman's first trial, for which he was convicted of murdering Peter Holm and given 50 years in prison. The dentist then pled guilty to the murder of Sophie Barrera to avoid the death penalty. Serving a life sentence for that murder in Missouri, Dr. Engelman was back in court by 1985 in Illinois. In 1984, Robert Handy, a convict and acquaintance of Dr. Engelman, admitted to authorities that he had taken part in the murder conspiracy of the Goosewell family. He implicated Dr. Engelman, who had bludgeoned Ronald Goosewell and shot him, as well as Ronald's widow, Barbara Boyle. Dr. Engelman was given 3 life sentences for the Goosewell murders. He also was convicted of federal mail fraud and given a 30-year federal sentence. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, including conspiring with his first wife to kill her husband, James Bullock, in 1958. Edna Ruth was never charged in the case due to lack of evidence. Barbara Boyle went on trial for the murder of her in-laws, Arthur and Vernita Goosewell, and husband Ronald in 1985. The jury acquitted her of the murders of Arthur and Vernita but convicted her of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Ronald Goosewell. Barbara Boyle was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 1985. She was granted parole in 2009. Dr. Engelman enjoyed his notoriety in Missouri, often comparing himself to legendary outlaw Jesse James. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, but the actual number is unknown. Unlike other serial killers, Dr. Engelman was inspired, at least in part, by greed. He also seemed to revel in his ability to not feel remorse. Dr. Engelman died of diabetes-related health issues in 1999 at age 72. He was incarcerated in Jefferson City at the time. On July 31, 1999, 17-year-old high school seniors and best friends J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett began their journey from their hometown of Dothan, Alabama. They were headed towards a birthday party for J.B. in Headland, Alabama, but the girls ended up getting lost along the way. In a phone call to her mother from Ozark around 11:30 p.m., Tracy informed her mom that they were heading back home. However, neither girl would ever make it home. Their lifeless bodies would be found the next day in the trunk of their car, raising the long-debated question of what might have happened to them. Did it have something to do with the party? Or did the girls run into trouble on the road heading back from Ozark? Located in southeast Alabama, near the Florida border, Ozark is known as the home of Fort Worker. Situated in the heart of Dale County, it's a typical charming southern town. Home to nearly 15,000 people, it's a nice place for both raising a family and spending retirement years. However, the town was not the sort of place to hit the headlines until the gruesome double homicide of 2 high school seniors in 1999, which baffled the community for years to come. J.B. Hilton Green Beasley was born on July 31, 1981, to parents Cheryl and Hilton Lanier Beasley in Troy, Alabama. After her parents separated, she moved to Dothan with her mother in 1984. She was adored by her mother as well as her stepfather, Joey Bagoon, whom her mother married after a few years. She grew up in a nice home in Dothan along with her 4 sisters. J.B. grew up to be a very outgoing girl who was involved in various activities, including cheerleading, dance, piano, and swimming. She even modeled for several agencies along with her sisters. Besides all of her hobbies, she loved hanging out with her friends and family. It was high school where J.B. met her fellow cheerleader Tracy Hollett, and the two did not take long to become best friends. Tracy Jean Hollett was born on March 3, 1982, to parents Carol and Robert Hollett. Unfortunately, her father, who worked in the Dothan Police Department, died when Tracy was only 5 years old. Her mother later remarried a man named Mike Roberts, who helped raise Tracy along with her mother. Unlike J.B., Tracy was a bit shy, but never hesitated to put people before herself. She was also very protective over her 2 brothers, who were much younger than her. Even at a young age, she was a responsible older sister. Tracy also attended Northview High School and regularly received good grades and was a cheerleader alongside J.B. As both girls were blossoming into their adulthood, J.B. and Tracy were oblivious to their dreadful fate, which would strip them of all their future hopes and dreams. On July 31, 1999, at around 10:05 p.m., J.B. and Tracy left Dothan in J.B.'s black 1993 Mazda 929 to attend a birthday party organized in J.B.'s honor in Headland, just a few miles north. However, the young girls, being unfamiliar with the roads leading to their destination, soon found themselves in trouble. Within a few minutes of starting their journey from their hometown, they got lost. Around 10:30 p.m., JB and Tracy stopped at a BP gas station near the intersection of Routes 173 and 431 in Headland in search of directions. Using a payphone at that gas station, they called their friends to get better directions to the party. After the call, the girls kept driving to reach their destination, but instead ended up in Ozark, Alabama, about 24 miles northwest of Headland. Realizing they still did not understand the directions to the party, at 11:30 p.m., the girls stopped at the Big Little store. Although the store was already closed by then, Tracy called her mother from the store's payphone. She informed her of how they got lost and ended up in Ozark, and that they were now planning to come back home. At the same time, a woman named Marilyn Merritt and her daughters stopped at the gas station to buy a soda. The girls then asked her for directions back to Dothan. Marilyn tried to explain the way as well as she could, and the young girls seemed to understand. Marilyn would later say that she noticed that the girls looked nice and polite, with a clean and tidy car. Marilyn remembered seeing the girls pulling out of the parking lot and turning right, just as Marilyn had directed. Although nothing seemed amiss at the time, J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett never made it home. The following morning, August 1st, 1999, at around 8 a.m., Tracy's mother called the police to report her daughter missing. It did not take police long to find their first clue regarding the girls' whereabouts. Later that day, after Tracy was reported missing, cops successfully located JB's car, which had been parked on Herring Avenue in Ozark. The most bizarre thing was, despite having filled the gas tank the day before, the tank was almost empty. The car was muddy, the driver's side window was partially down, yet the doors were locked. However, police could not find any signs of a forced entry into the vehicle. Inside the car, JB's driver's license was lying on the dash. Apprentices of both girls were still inside the car, along with their cash. The only known missing item was JB's car keys. However, there was no sign of either of the girls. A palm print was recovered from the trunk lid of the locked trunk, which gave the police a foreboding feeling that something was horribly wrong. Assessing the scene, cops theorized that the locked trunk could provide them with significant clues, but without the keys, they could not open the trunk. It took them 6 long hours to discover that they could open the trunk of the car with the help of an interior latch without needing a trunk key or a locksmith. Upon opening the trunk, police made a grisly discovery. The lifeless bodies of the 2 girls were stuffed inside. Both girls were fully clothed, but their pants were soiled from the waist down. Both girls had been shot once in the head, Tracy in the temple, and JB in the right cheek. Tracy had a 9mm shell casing on her leg, scratches on her arm, and her jeans had thorn briars on them. JB's clothes, on the other hand, were muddy and dirty, especially her newly purchased shoes. Although authorities concluded that the teenagers were killed execution style, they had most likely been killed inside of the trunk. As the families were informed about the heart-wrenching discovery, authorities formally started their homicide investigation. Although investigators were considering robbery as a possible motive during the initial phase of the investigation, it was quickly ruled out after confirming that not only the girls' purses, but also their jewelry, money, and credit cards remained inside the car. Autopsies later confirmed that there were no traces of alcohol or drugs in their system. The report also suggested that neither girl had been sexually assaulted prior to their demise. This basically ruled out the possibility of the crime being sexually motivated. However, more than 2 months later, the state crime lab issued a report indicating that there were traces of unknown semen on JB's bra, panties, and skin. The palm print recovered from the lid of the trunk also remained unidentified. With no matches in the system and no one to compare their evidence against, authorities were left without much to go on. As word of a double murder of 2 teen girls spread like wildfire, authorities were no close to zeroing in on a suspect. A reward was also put out in an attempt to gather information regarding the murder, but it did not uncover any new leads. However, authorities, it seemed, soon got an unexpected breakthrough. On September 1st, exactly 1 month after the bodies of JB and Tracy were found, a longtime Ozark resident, 28-year-old Johnny William Barrington, walked into the Ozark Police Department to tell a bizarre story. He claimed that he had been a witness to the high-profile double homicide of the Dothan teenagers. Barrington told police that on the night of the murders, Around the same time Tracy Hollett called her mother from the payphone at the Big Little store, he went out to buy milk for his 2-year-old son. He claimed that while he was out, he had witnessed the horrendous act. He returned home at 1 a.m., visibly upset, and told his wife that he'd been hit by a black truck near Herring Road. In the days following JB and Tracy's murder, when he shared the information with some of his friends, they convinced him that he should go to the police with this information, as it could be linked to the murders of Tracy and JB, which would not only help police crack the case, but could also get him the reward as well. Disturbingly, in the 4 hours of interview with Ozark police, Barentine changed his story 6 times. According to then Ozark Police Chief Tony R. Spivey, Barentine initially said that on the night of the killings, he had seen a black truck speeding away from the area where the girls were found. But as the interview continued, his story kept evolving and changing. Finally, he claimed that he picked up a tattooed man he didn't know, and the two drove by the Big Little store. He further claimed that the man to whom he'd given a ride got into a car with 2 girls, whom Barentine identified as the deceased Dothan teenagers. He said they ended up on Herring Avenue, where the man forced the girls out of the car. A struggle occurred between the men and the girls as they were trying to get away. After placing them in the trunk, Barentine said, he saw something in that man's hand moments before hearing 2 gunshots, and when the man returned, Barentine again gave him a ride from the scene and then went home. In another version, Barentine confessed to investigators that he knew the man he'd picked up and given a ride to, and identified him to be his neighbor. Alarmingly, Barentine himself lived less than a mile from where police discovered the bodies. Police did not buy his story, naming him the prime suspect in the murder of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett. Ozark police arrested Johnny Barentine on the spot, charging him with 2 counts of capital murder. But there were several problems with his accounts. Barentine never mentioned sexual activity that would account for the semen found on JB's clothing and body. Besides, the neighbor he implicated had an alibi for the evening. Several people noted that he looked startled and like he had just awoken from a deep sleep in his mugshot. Just after arrest, Barentine immediately admitted that he had fabricated the whole story in order to collect the reward money. However, police at the time believed they arrested the right person. In the preliminary hearing on September 21st, Alavera Bureau of Investigation agent Charles Hardims testified that Barentine was able to describe the girl's clothing and other items consistent with the crime, suggesting he was there at the scene. From the time of his arrest, Barentine was held without bond in the Dale County Jail in Ozark. In an October 18th bond hearing, Barentine denied he was involved in the killings, confessing to the judge that he never picked up a tattooed man and didn't see anything the night of the murders. He said that he simply went to the BP at about 11 p.m. to get milk for his little boy, and later fabricated the whole story to claim the reward money. However, he was denied the bond and sent back to jail. Even during this turbulent time, Barentine's family members never stopped supporting him. They even gave interviews to the media professing his innocence, saying he was incapable of hurting anyone. Barentine's lawyer, Bill Kimmons, also maintained that his client was not responsible for the double murders in any way, shape, or form. He further stated that the 4 hours of continued interrogation took a toll on Barentine, who had wrapped himself in this mess of a lie. During police questioning, he was never told that he could go to the bathroom or was free to leave whenever he wanted. Barentine's defense also pointed out the fact that Barentine only finished the 7th grade and a portion of the 8th grade. He said his client was in special education classes, indicating his inability to plan this heinous crime. Barentine was finally released from jail on December 17, 1999, after it was revealed that Barentine's DNA did not match that from the semen found on JB's body and clothing. In January 2000, a Dale County grand jury declined to indict Barentine and cleared him as a suspect in this double murder. After Johnny Barentine was cleared of suspicion, the investigation endured a setback. The methods employed by investigators were also criticized. There began to be mutterings that the Ozark police were incapable of handling the case. However, police still had some potential suspects on their radar. One of the most viable suspects was a man from Michigan who was at a party the night of the murders near where JB's car was later found. Investigators discovered that the man, who was not publicly named, left town within days of the murders. Investigators have even traveled to Michigan 3 times to interview him. He could not account for 3 or 4 hours of his time on the night of the murders, and later made some suspicious statements to people. However, the police declined to elaborate on these alleged statements. As it turned out, he was also later ruled out by DNA. One other significant lead police were chasing during the initial phase of the investigation was the driver of a small white pickup truck. A video surveillance camera inside the Big Little store caught a grainy, poor-quality image of what appeared to be a small white pickup truck at the gas pumps at the same time JB and Tracy were at the payphone calling Tracy's mother. No digital trail could be traced, though, as there was no record of a gas purchase at the pump at that time. The video neither showed anyone getting out of the truck, nor did it show the driver clearly. After releasing a photo of the truck to the media a month into the investigation, police urged the public to come forward with information. Unfortunately, both the driver and the truck vanished into thin air as the lead faded away. The last lead for the investigators was a man from Mississippi. Police said the man, who was extradited from Jones County, had been arrested there on an outstanding warrant for possession of drug paraphernalia issued in Ozark. The man had been staying with relatives in Ozark, but left 2 days after the murders. According to Spivey, investigators wanted to question him in connection with the case. However, no significant information came out in light of this lead. Without any evidence, investigators were forced to let him go. In March of 2000, a woman called police and said she heard screams and 2 gunshots near Highway 123 South, just inside the city limits, on the night of July 31st, 1999. When asked why she did not come forward earlier, she claimed she was scared to get involved. Based on her description, police thoroughly searched the area and discovered a 9mm bullet, the same type used to kill the girls. But the brand name of the bullet did not match the brand of bullet shell casing found on Tracy's body. Furthermore, the unspent bullet had no markings that would help with forensic comparison to other evidence in the case. Again, another dead end for investigators. Although several leads over the years proved to lead nowhere, investigators never lost hope in the search for a DNA match. As the heartbroken families of JB and Tracy tried to get on with their lives, the case turned cold. Then years later, another twist in a case added another layer to the thrilling mystery. After remaining cold for years, 2015 would mark a bombshell allegation in the murder case of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett. Rena Crum, a sworn Ozark Auxiliary police officer, came forward and openly accused an Ozark police officer of murdering J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett and others of covering it up. Rena alleged that on the night of July 31st, 1999, a police officer for Ozark Police pulled over J.B. Beasley, demanding to know the whereabouts of some cassette tapes that contained recorded conversations. According to Rena, these tapes could have incriminated Ozark police officers regarding the illegal business of cocaine distribution and profits. The incident escalated into the murders of 2 innocent teens, she further alleged. Rena claimed that she'd been threatened by multiple law enforcement officials who had knowledge of the murderer's identity and covered it up by getting rid of evidence. Rena named 3 cops, Gary Butch Whittington, Rex Tipton, and Eddie Henderson, accusing them of harassing and threatening her. She went as far as to say that then Police Chief Tony Spivey, who headed the original investigation, had also helped cover it up. However, she shied away from revealing the name of the police officer, who, she claimed, had actually committed the murders. Renowned American journalist and newspaper editor John B. Carroll wrote an article saying that he believed the officer in question presumed the 2 girls intended to use these tapes in a court case that was scheduled for August 2, 1999, less than 48 hours after they were murdered. The tapes were to be entered as evidence into that case. In this article, Carroll also stated that Rena was severely beaten with a baseball bat after coming forward, which stopped her from naming the actual killer. The law enforcement officials Rena accused had all denied having any involvement in the murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett. Without any physical evidence, none of them were ever formally named as a suspect in the case. Regardless of that, the allegations blew up on numerous true crime websites and social media, leading to a defamation lawsuit. On January 29, 2016, Keith Coffin, Rex Tipson, Tony Spivey, Eddie Henderson, and Gary Butch Whittington all Ozark, Alabama police officials, filed a lawsuit against Rena Crum, John B. Carroll, and D. Matthews for libel, slander, and defamation of character. That case was dismissed in 2018. In May 2016, Rena Crum received a suspended sentence and a $250 fine after being convicted for harassing J.B. Beasley's sister. Over the years, authorities investigated many theories. They interviewed hundreds of people and took DNA samples from several suspects, but to no avail. It would take 20 years and the innovation of new DNA technologies before police could apprehend a suspect. In March 2019, investigators sent the DNA found on JB's body and clothes to the Virginia-based Parabon Nanolab, which specializes in DNA phenotyping and genetics using public genealogy databases. After analyzing the DNA, the lab finally made a connection to a suspect, Coley McCraney. 45-year-old Coley Lewis McCraney was never on the radar of investigators in the brutal 1999 murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett until DNA implicated them in the crime. McCraney, who's an Alabama native, graduated from Carroll High School in Ozark in 1992, where he was an athlete as well as the president of the Library Club. After that, he joined the U.S. Air Force and served there from 1993 to 1997. He was married in 1992, but separated from his first wife in 1994 and later divorced. According to the reports of Dothan Eagle at the time, McCraney's ex-wife filed a complaint with the Air Force in 1994, stating that McCraney had assaulted her. McCraney remarried in 2001 and had children with his second wife. Other than failing to pay child support in 1998, McCraney had no criminal record in the past 20 years or so. He'd been working as a trucker all of his life and had worked for several trucking companies in Alabama over the years. In recent years, he co-founded a church and worked as a bishop there. At the time of the killings, he was around 26 and living on Lisenby Drive in Ozark, about 1 mile away from where the bodies of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett were found in 1999. 2 decades after the Splain High School seniors J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett were found, Coley McCraney was arrested after a traffic stop in Daleville, Alabama on March 19, 2019. In the interview with police, after he was taken into custody, McCraney said he did not know the girls. Investigators did not clarify any motive for the murder. The news of his arrest was a great shock to the Ozark community and the Ozark police chief, Marlins Walker, who went to school with McCraney. As it seemed that the many twisted strands in this baffling case were finally all being tied together, there was to be one more revelation. The now 53-year-old Rena Crum, who previously accused the Ozark Police Department of covering up the murder, recanted her allegations as she testified during a hearing from McCraney in August 2022. McCraney, now 49, is facing 5 counts of capital murder charges for the shooting deaths of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett. He now sits behind bars in Dale County Jail as of the time of his arrest. His bond has been denied, pending his trial on April 17, 2023. The news of finally apprehending the killer was a relief to the families of both girls. However, reliving all the haunting memories through the trial and hearings is another painful journey still to come. We can only hope that the families can heal through a sense of peace that their daughters are finally getting justice more than 2 decades later. Do you believe McCraney is responsible for the murders? If so, what was the motive? Do you find any validity in the police cover-up claims? Let us know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this. In Westfield, New Jersey, behind the stately doors of a luxurious mansion, a shocking secret lay dormant. John List, a devout father and husband, led what appeared to be the ideal suburban life with his wife Helen, their 3 children, and his elderly mother. Yet, beneath this perfect image, a brewing turmoil was about to spiral into a dark abyss from which there was no return. In November 1971, the unimaginable happened. The entire List family was brutally murdered, and the perpetrator vanished into thin air, leaving behind a mystery that would baffle authorities for nearly 2 decades. What was the real motive behind this horrifying act? And how did an ordinary man mastermind one of the most infamous disappearances in American history? To understand the tragedy of Breeze Knoll, we must journey back to the origins of its central figure, John List. Born in 1925 in Bay City, Michigan, to German-American parents, John's upbringing was steeped in a strict Lutheran faith, a doctrine that would dictate much of his life's path. John grew in the shadow of a domineering father and the weight of religious expectation. His home life was devoid of warmth and affection, replaced instead with rigid discipline and the demand for perfection. Seeking escape and perhaps a sense of purpose, List served as a laboratory technician in the Army during World War II. In 1944, his father died. After List was discharged in 1946, his return to civilian life saw him armed with a degree in accounting, a profession that prized the order and control he had long been conditioned to uphold. In 1950, he re-enlisted to fight in the Korean War. At Fort Eustis in Virginia, he met 24-year-old Helen Morris Taylor, a widow with a daughter, Brenda. Her husband was killed in action in Korea. Helen became the first woman of 26-year-old List. In 1951, John married her. The union, blessed under the eyes of God, was expected to be the foundation of John's ideal family. But beneath the surface, cracks began to form, revealing the dark side of the American dream. Helen's battle with alcoholism and a diagnosis of tertiary syphilis, a secret she kept from John until after their marriage, planted seeds of betrayal and resentment. This disease made her nearly blind. Helen's disability prevented her from walking, and she mostly stayed in bed. The couple had 3 children together, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. In 1960, List's stepdaughter Brenda got married and left their house. John was vice president and controller in a bank, and also Sunday school teacher at the local church. The family never missed a service. To the outside world, they were a picture-perfect family. Yet, John's inability to reconcile the imperfections of his family life with the unattainable standards set by his faith and upbringing foreshadowed a silent storm brewing on the horizon. 1965 marked a turning point for the Lists as they moved into Breeze Knoll, a 19-room Victorian mansion with marble fireplaces and a Tiffany skylight in Westfield, New Jersey. It was a grand statement, but its upkeep put a strain on John's finances, further exacerbating the pressure he felt to provide and maintain the facade of success. It was the most expensive house in Westfield at the time, and the family could not fully furnish it. List's neighbors said he was cold and reserved. Sometimes they saw John mowing his lawn in a full suit and tie. His marriage was probably unhappy. The family's Lutheran pastor overheard Helen saying to John, "If you were half the man my first husband was, we wouldn't be having the troubles we're having." John's professional life was marked by frequent changes and failures, a stark contrast to the image of stability he desperately sought to project. In 1971, at the age of 46, John List lost his position at the bank. The job loss was a personal humiliation, a failure not only as a provider but as a man worthy of respect and admiration. His efforts to find another employment were unsuccessful. The thought of informing his family about the loss of income seemed unbearable. He dressed for work every morning and spent his days at the train station reading newspapers and covertly withdrew funds from his mother's bank accounts to cover the mortgage. List declined to seek welfare assistance, fearing the humiliating shame it would bring upon him in the community and contravening the values of self-reliance instilled in him by his father. The psychological portrait of John List that emerges is one of a man at war with himself, torn between the dogmatic beliefs of his upbringing and the realities of his faltering life. John was walking a tightrope of his own making. The chasm between the ideal and the real was widening, pushing him to the brink. As winter's chill enveloped the town of Westfield, a shroud of mystery began to unfurl around the stately List mansion. What lay within its walls was a secret so dark it would chill the bones of a community. Days turned to weeks since anyone had seen John List or his family. Neighbors grew concerned. Lights in the mansion burned day and night, yet its inhabitants seemed to have vanished into thin air. The once meticulous lawn now lay unkempt, a silent testament to the abnormality of the situation. Finally, light bulbs started burning out one by one. December 7th, 1971, marked the day the silence was broken. Police, responding to concerned calls, entered Breeze Knoll. Nothing could have prepared them for the scene that awaited. Organ church music was playing in the cold house as the heating had been turned off. In the mansion's ballroom, the lifeless bodies of the List family were found, each meticulously laid out. John's wife, Helen, their 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., Frederick, and his mother, Alma, had all been shot. It was a methodical execution, a chillingly orchestrated end to a family. On November 9, 1971, List dropped the children off at school. He returned home around 9 a.m. and got 2 old handguns from his garage. While his children were at school, he entered the kitchen where his 47-year-old wife, Helen, was having toast and sipping her morning coffee. He shot her in the back of her head. Then he went upstairs to his 84-year-old mother's room on the 3rd floor. She was making toast. Greeting him with a kiss, she asked him about the loud noise. List said he didn't know and shot her in the face. "Like Judas, I gave her a kiss," he remarked later. Then he dragged his wife's body to the ballroom, mopped the floor in the kitchen, and ate a sandwich waiting for his children. In his memoir, List wrote that he had to mop the floor 3 or 4 times, and because they had no mop wringer, he had to wring it by hand. He confessed that he experienced no qualms or feelings of remorse. His 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, and 13-year-old son, Frederick, arrived home from school. List shot each of them in the back of the head. "I approached all of them from behind so they wouldn't realize at the last moment what I was going to do to them," he said later. "After it was all over, I said some prayers for them all, from the hymn book. That was the least that I could do." He said he had to kill his mother because the other deaths would have been a tremendous shock to her. After that, List had lunch and drove to the post office, and then to his bank to close both his and his mother's bank accounts. Later, he drove to Westfield High School to watch his 15-year-old son, John, play in a soccer game. He drove him home where he shot him 10 times. Evidence of a misfire indicated that his son tried to defend himself. He also didn't die at once, hence List shot multiple times. "I didn't want him to suffer," he said later. He sent notes to the children's schools and part-time jobs saying that the children would be visiting their ill grandmother in North Carolina for a few weeks. Milk, mail, and newspaper deliveries were stopped by him. List arranged the bodies of his wife and children on sleeping bags in the mansion's ballroom. Their faces were covered with rags. His mother's body was left in her converted apartment in the attic. List slept in the house where his family lay dead, then left the next morning. Before leaving, he tuned a radio to a religious station, leaving religious hymns playing in the empty rooms of the house. He explained that the music over the intercom was supposed to deter burglars. When the police discovered the bodies, John List was nowhere to be found. The man who sought control above all had orchestrated his family's demise before vanishing, leaving behind only a haunting letter that attempted to justify the unjustifiable. It was a 5-page letter to his pastor. List's letter speaks volumes. It reveals a man who saw himself as a failure, unable to fulfill the roles society and his faith demanded of him. In his mind, murdering his family was a twisted salvation from financial ruin and the moral decay he perceived. In his letter, he said, "As I was doing it, I knew it was wrong. But as he was broke, he didn't want to subject his children to poverty and the shame of losing their mansion. He also said he saw too much evil in the world, and he had killed his family to save their souls. He was afraid that his family, confronted with a world full of evil and poverty, would turn from God. To his mind, this was the only way to ensure their safe arrival in heaven. He said, "I've finally decided that the only way to save them from that was to kill them." He wrote that his family was turning away from God and would ultimately spend eternity in hell for their sins because his wife Helen had stopped going to church. Moreover, his teenage daughter Patty desired to become an actress. I'm sure many will say, how can anyone do such a horrible thing? My only answer is it isn't easy and was only done after much thought. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "Mother is in the hallway in the attic, 3rd floor. She was too heavy to move." List's letter offered a window into a fractured mind. His actions suggested a delusional belief system. His need for control and perfection, coupled with deep religious convictions, warped into a justification for his unfathomable choice. The discovery of the List murders sent shockwaves through Westfield. One of the first officers who saw the bodies, Robert Kenny, said, "After 28 years as a police officer and 14 as an investigator, you see everything. But this was unique. The mystery of John List's disappearance would confound authorities for nearly 2 decades. But as the manhunt stretched on, the legend of John List grew, a ghostly figure who had slipped through the cracks of a society he could no longer face. With the grim discovery inside Breeze Knoll, the quiet town of Westfield found itself at the epicenter of a horrifying mystery. The investigation into the List family murders unfolded like a puzzle missing crucial pieces. Each room of the mansion told a part of the story, but the narrator of this tragic tale was conspicuously absent. As the manhunt for John List began, investigators faced the daunting task of tracking a man who seemed to have evaporated. Meanwhile, the public grappled with the duality of a devout churchgoer and a cold-blooded killer. List had planned his escape meticulously, cleaning the crime scenes, cutting himself out of every family photo with scissors, severing ties, and leaving no trace. He burned the photos along with his passport in his Weber grill. In an era before digital footprints, List vanished into the ether. The FBI found his car parked at Kennedy International Airport in New York, but there was no trace of him. The police investigated hundreds of leads without success. In August 1972, 9 months after the murder, Breeze Knoll stood empty until it was mysteriously destroyed by fire. There were rumors that the house was cursed. Despite being officially deemed arson, no suspects have been identified. The fire also consumed the mansion's ballroom stained glass skylight, believed to be a signed Tiffany original and valued at around $100,000 at that time, which would be approximately $700,000 today. Selling the ceiling would have allowed List to pay off his debts. By 1974, a new house had been constructed on the property. The absence of technology in 1970s was a cloak of invisibility for List. His identity was erased. For List, it was a desperate bid for survival, a twisted form of self-preservation that made him abandon his name, his history, and his crimes. Assuming the name Robert Peter Clark, List started anew in Denver, Colorado. Here, he melded into the fabric of society, unnoticed. For List, integrating into a new life was simpler in a city like Denver, which during the 1970s saw a significant number of people relocating from the East Coast. He grew a mustache, swapped his suits for casual clothes, and took to wearing a cap, yet made no significant effort to alter his appearance further. He first worked as a chef at a Holiday Inn, and between 1979 and 1986, he worked as the controller for a paper box manufacturing company located just outside Denver. Adopting a new identity allowed List to compartmentalize his guilt and live outwardly as a regular citizen. Yet, beneath the surface, the burden of his past life lingered, a specter only he could see. List's new life was a mirror of the old, minus the family he had destroyed. He worked in accounting, remarried, and maintained a facade of devout faith. He became a member of a Lutheran church and organized a carpool for congregants without transport. At a church event, he encountered 35-year-old divorcee Dolores Miller, an Army PX clerk, and they married in 1985. He told her his first wife had died of cancer and moved into her apartment in Aurora, Colorado, situated 10 miles east of Denver. In February 1988, the couple moved to a house in the Brander Mill neighborhood of Midlothian, Virginia. There, List continued his career in accounting at a small firm. For nearly 2 decades, John List, now Bob Clark, believed he had outsmarted the world and committed the perfect crime. He let his guard down, losing his mustache. He wrote that his family was turning away from God and would ultimately spend eternity in hell for their sins because his wife Helen had stopped going to church. Moreover, his teenage daughter Patty desired to become an actress. I'm sure many will say, how can anyone do such a horrible thing? My only answer is it isn't easy and was only done after much thought. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "Mother is in the hallway in the attic, 3rd floor. She was too heavy to move." List's letter offered a window into a fractured mind. His actions suggested a delusional belief system. His need for control and perfection, coupled with deep religious convictions, warped into a justification for his unfathomable choice. The discovery of the List murders sent shockwaves through Westfield. One of the first officers who saw the bodies, Robert Kenny, said, "After 28 years as a police officer and 14 as an investigator, you see everything." But this was unique. The mystery of John List's disappearance would confound authorities for nearly 2 decades. But as the manhunt stretched on, the legend of John List grew, a ghostly figure who had slipped through the cracks of a society he could no longer face. With the grim discovery inside Breeze Knoll, the quiet town of Westfield found itself at the epicenter of a horrifying mystery. The investigation into the List family murders unfolded like a puzzle missing crucial pieces. Each room of the mansion told a part of the story, but the narrator of this tragic tale was conspicuously absent. As the manhunt for John List began, investigators faced the daunting task of tracking a man who seemed to have evaporated. Meanwhile, the public grappled with the duality of a devout churchgoer and a cold-blooded killer. List had planned his escape meticulously, cleaning the crime scenes, cutting himself out of every family photo with scissors, severing ties, and leaving no trace. He burned the photos along with his passport in his Weber grill. In an era before digital footprints, List vanished into the ether. The FBI found his car parked at Kennedy International Airport in New York, but there was no trace of him. The police investigated hundreds of leads without success. In August 1972, 9 months after the murder, Breeze Knoll stood empty until it was mysteriously destroyed by fire. There were rumors that the house was cursed. Despite being officially deemed arson, no suspects have been identified. The fire also consumed the mansion's ballroom stained glass skylight, believed to be a signed Tiffany original and valued at around $100,000 at that time, which would be approximately $700,000 today. Selling the ceiling would have allowed List to pay off his debts. By 1974, a new house had been constructed on the property. The absence of technology in 1970s was a cloak of invisibility for List. His identity was erased. For List, it was a desperate bid for survival, a twisted form of self-preservation that made him abandon his name, his history, and his crimes. Assuming the name Robert Peter Clark, List started anew in Denver, Colorado. Here, he melded into the fabric of society, unnoticed. For List, integrating into a new life was simpler in a city like Denver, which during the 1970s saw a significant number of people relocating from the East Coast. He grew a mustache, swapped his suits for casual clothes, and took to wearing a cap, yet made no significant effort to alter his appearance further. He first worked as a chef at a Holiday Inn, and between 1979 and 1986, he worked as the controller for a paper box manufacturing company located just outside Denver. Adopting a new identity allowed List to compartmentalize his guilt and live outwardly as a regular citizen. Yet, beneath the surface, the burden of his past life lingered, a specter only he could see. List's new life was a mirror of the old, minus the family he had destroyed. He worked in accounting, remarried, and maintained a facade of devout faith. He became a member of a Lutheran church and organized a carpool for congregants without transport. At a church event, he encountered 35-year-old divorcee Dolores Miller, an Army PX clerk, and they married in 1985. He told her his first wife had died of cancer and moved into her apartment in Aurora, Colorado, situated 10 miles east of Denver. In February 1988, the couple moved to a house in the Brander Mill neighborhood of Midlothian, Virginia. There, List continued his career in accounting at a small firm. For nearly 2 decades, John List. Defense lawyers depicted List as someone deeply affected by a religious upbringing enforced by his parents, which, they argued, drove him to madness. However, the jury was unconvinced. Throughout the trial, the emotionless tone of List's letters, his clearly planned escape strategies, and his lack of remorse, maintaining he acted as the savior rather than the murderer of his family, resulted in his conviction. During his trial, List testified that his financial difficulties reached crisis level in 1971, following his job loss due to the shutdown of the Jersey City Bank. To hide this embarrassing fact from his family, he maintained his usual routines. Over time, the family's financial situation became worse, leading List to encourage his children to find part-time work under the guise of teaching them responsibility, though it was actually a strategy to aid the family's finances. Furthermore, he struggled with his wife Helen's alcohol dependency and her undisclosed tertiary syphilis, which she had hidden for 18 years after contracting it from her first husband. Helen had manipulated List into marrying her by falsely claiming pregnancy, then insisted on a Maryland wedding to avoid states that required syphilis testing before marriage. At the time, a premarital syphilis test was mandated in most other states. Her condition deteriorated over the years. She didn't say anything about that to List, but a thorough examination revealed the condition in 1969. Eventually, her disease, together with her excessive drinking, transformed her into an unkempt and paranoid recluse who would often humiliate List in public, comparing him unfavorably to her first husband in bed. John List's actions were a cataclysmic culmination of years of internal and external pressures. Financial despair, a crumbling facade of familial perfection, and a rigid, punitive religious upbringing coalesced into a devastating breakdown of his moral and psychological boundaries. Witness after witness painted a portrait of a man at odds with reality. Yet, it was List's own letters and the chilling confession tape played for the jury that offered the most haunting insights into his psyche. In his confession, List spoke with a chilling calmness, claiming financial ruin and a misguided attempt to save his family's souls as his motives. But beneath this veneer of rationalization lurked deeper, darker struggles. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. On April 12, 1990, List was found guilty on 5 counts of first-degree murder. During his sentencing hearing, he refused to fully accept blame, stating, "I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer." However, the judge firmly disagreed, declaring, "John List is without remorse and without honor," he said. After 18 years, 5 months and 22 days, it is now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John List to rise from the grave. List received the maximum sentence allowed then, 5 consecutive life terms. List appealed his conviction, citing post-traumatic stress disorder from his military experience as impairing his judgment and claiming the letter found at the crime scene, which was essentially a confession, should be considered a confidential message to his pastor and not admissible in court. These appeals were dismissed by a federal appeals court. Years later, List admitted some regret for his actions in a 2002 interview with Connie Chung, saying, "I wish I had never done what I did. I've regretted my action and prayed for forgiveness ever since." Regarding why he didn't take his own life, he believed it would have prevented him from going to heaven, where he hoped to be reunited with his family. "So eventually I got to the point where I felt that I could kill them. Hopefully, they would go to heaven, and then maybe I would have a chance to later confess my sins to God and get forgiveness." He also said, "When we get to heaven, they'll either have forgiven me or won't realize what had happened. I'm sure that if we recognize each other, we'll like each other's company just like we did here when times were better." List passed away at the age of 82 from pneumonia complications on March 21, 2008, in prison at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey. John List's case became a cornerstone in the study of family annihilators, offering insights into the mind of a killer who operates under the guise of protector, driven by twisted logic and profound psychological distress.